Denise says, no. We have 1 minute.
You know they're going to talk about you if you do.
Like 10 seconds away.
Yeah. Just say it.
All right, good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And I have asked Mr. Scott Abernathy to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, we are reconvening and calling the regular meeting to order. And I'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's meeting. This is the meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. And I'd like to just run off our process for audience participation. The purpose of our board meetings is for the board to conduct its business in public, not to provide a public forum. Those wishing to comment must complete a comment card with your name, address, and purpose, and give it to the board secretary before the meeting begins. Our comment cards will be accepted tonight until Agenda 3.0, which is our Board of Directors discussions and approval section. The board may interrupt or terminate an individual statement when it is too lengthy, obscene, or irrelevant. Abusive public comments personally directed towards staff members will not be tolerated, and the board as a whole will have the final decision in determining the appropriateness of all such rulings. During the meeting, the board will listen to but not respond to comments from visitors. When it is your turn to address the board, please state your name and address at the start of your testimony. Identify the organization, if any, that you represent, and please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. You will hear a timer when 3 minutes are up, and you will then be asked to stop your remarks. Visitors who have completed a comment card indicating a desire to speak to an agenda item will be given an opportunity to speak to the board at the time the item is addressed by the board, and your name will be called at that portion of the agenda. And the written material should be submitted to the superintendent's office at least 1 week in advance of the meeting when providing board members with background information per board procedure. All right, one day I'll memorize that. Dr. Watts, are there any changes to the agenda, please?
President Vengadaslam, yes, please note that minutes from, and members of the board, excuse me, Ms. Halley, minutes from the September 25th special meeting were added to the consent agenda.
All right, thank you. I'd like to call for a motion to approve the agenda, a change to the agenda, and add the minutes to the consent agenda, please.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, are there any questions or discussions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And motion passes. Looks like we don't have any cards tonight to speak to an agenda item. So we will move on to 2.0 presentations, and that is our 2.01 school discipline report. I'd like to call on Mr. Israel Vela and Randy Heath to present the school discipline report. Both will be available for questions.
Thank you very much, President Vengadaslam, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Howley. To the board, I just wanted to open up, as you recall, a year ago, we started our quarterly reports. Today, you will hear our 17-18 summary for our discipline report, as well as our safety services activity report for the year. And so, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over first to Mr. Randy Heath.
Thank you. Good evening, President Vengadaslam, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Howley. It's once again time for our annual discipline report, and so I'm just going to go through some of the statistics, and then we'll give an opportunity for questions at the end. We're going to provide a trend overview, as we've been doing for a number of years now. We're looking at it not only in terms of 1 year, but we're looking at 3-year trends. We're identifying areas of focus that we have as a district surrounding our discipline, and then we're sharing some of the steps being implemented to systematically decrease exclusionary discipline. We'll jump right in and show that, as you can see, we did have an increase in suspensions and out-of-school exclusionary discipline this year after several years of a downward trend. This last year was the first one that we started to dip back up again. So it is worth watching and making sure that hopefully it is just a one-year trend and not something that is continuing back up the other way. Long-term suspensions continue to be low, which is good news, especially what it was compared to several years ago when we saw large numbers of kids being long-term suspended. And I always like to take this opportunity to just clarify around our emergency expulsions that per state law, all emergency expulsions must be converted to another form of corrective action within 10 days. So although we did have an increase there, those were all converted into other suspensions. So you pretty much see them twice. So you have to remember that when you're looking at the emergency expulsions. We start by looking at in-school suspensions. We can see we have it broken up by elementary, middle, and high school. Elementary, we saw increases in pretty much every racial category, except the Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. Well, actually, it was the pretty steady. One of the things you want to look at is that it's not a lot different from where it was 2 years ago prior to this. Middle school, we did see increases pretty much across the racial categories. And then in high school, we saw a mixed up and down. Short-term suspensions. We continue to see some trends at the elementary level of increases this last year in pretty much every racial category. Middle school, we saw some increases, some decreases, and we saw the same thing at the high school level. Nothing that was too far out of line from where we were 2 years previous to that. Long-term continues to be small numbers across the board. These are our groups, our gender. We continue to have a large disparity between our males and our females. Our ELL students did see a jump in exclusionary discipline last year. So we want to keep an eye on that. Although our ELL population did increase a bit last year, not to the point that it would indicate this level in increase. But then again, our non-ELL students also increased at a higher rate. Special ed also saw that increase, and free and reduced lunch did as well. I wanted to show this because it speaks to something I'm going to talk about later, which is the suspensions per level, high school, middle, and elementary. Middle school continues to make up about a third of the suspensions each year. What's interesting about that is whereas elementary covers 7 grade levels, high school covers 4, middle school only covers 2. So we're continuing to see a third of our suspensions coming out of the middle school level when they represent only 2 of our grade levels. So that's something we've been watching actually for a number of years. It's not so different from, say, some other districts. It's a challenging age group, and we can all remember back to middle school it being a little bit difficult, but that doesn't mean we can't do better with it. Exclusionary discipline by category. We've seen some increases in certain categories. One of them is the assaults of staff. Remember, we started actually tracking this. We didn't used to break up the difference between assaults on students or assaults on staff. We started keeping that information a couple of years ago, and last year we saw a larger number, and that could be that we are just doing a better job of paying attention and tracking those incidents, or it could mean that there might be an increase in them. This is the chart that always takes a little bit of explaining, so I will go back and do that. The purpose of this chart is to try to understand what percentage of our different racial categories are getting suspended, at what rates. And so let's take the multiracial category there as an example. As a district, we have 265 students that are categorized as multiracial students. That represents 9.62% of our total enrollment as a district. So 4.79% of all multiracial students have incidents of at least one suspension or more. That represents 127 students. Of those 127 students, each one averages 1.8 suspensions per student. So when looking at this, you want to, the darker the bar indicates the higher number of students from that race that have been assigned multiple out-of-school suspensions. So it's important to keep an eye on that total. This is a new one that we haven't shown in the past, and it's a little incomplete at this point because we don't have last year's data yet. It hasn't been posted to the OSPI website. This is directly from the OSPI website. There's a great tool that is available on there to really compare your district to other districts around the state. And for the 2 years, 15-16 and 16-17, the dots that are on this chart represent the districts in our ESD, our Puget Sound ESD. You can see that Kent in 15-16 represented 2.9% of our students had at least one suspension or higher, and then last year it was 2.7. So these usually are released later this fall when we will get last year's data, and we can take a look at that again when they are released. I'll bring it back to the board. I do this and I show this for a couple different reasons. First off, I want to continue to point out that we fall below the state average regarding exclusionary discipline. We're about in the middle of the Puget Sound ESD. And the other piece is to kind of flip the script. Over 97% of our students received no suspensions at all. And so I think although we need to continue to focus on exclusionary discipline, we also can't lose the fact that most of our students are being successful and doing what they need to do and not being suspended. So one of the great things about this tool that is on the OSPI website is you can filter it in many, many, many different ways. And you can compare yourselves to the state and to other districts in the Puget Sound region or others with similar demographics in a variety of different ways. And that might be something we might want to look at more like a work session or something where we can dive deeper into some of those categories. Some areas of focus that we've identified from last year's discipline include that we have, after a multi-year trend of steady decrease in exclusionary discipline, there was an increase this past year. Both the number of suspensions and the percentage of Hispanic, Latino, and multiracial students who receive suspensions have increased. And this increase has happened primarily at the middle school level. And then the incidents of assault of staff have increased, and at this point it is mainly at the elementary level. 141 of the 149 incidents that resulted from exclusionary discipline revolving assault of staff happened at the elementary level. And our English language learners have the highest suspension level that they have had in 3 years. So these are all trends that we need to focus on and keep track of and see if this is just a one-year thing or if it is something that is starting a trend that we need to address. Some next steps. We have really embarked heavily. We're now, a couple years into our multi-tiered systems of support. Year 2, actually, of district implementation, even though some buildings have been doing it for much longer. We're collaborating at this point with teaching and learning to develop the academic side of the triangle as well. Through a coaching model, we're providing targeted supports based on unique needs of the school. So through targeting of coaches going and working with individual schools, looking at their discipline data, they are helping them to make decisions at the school level around systems changes, or in some cases, looking at individual student data and helping them come up with behavior plans and areas that they can help address behavior. We're use of data at district and school level to identify systems level strategies. Well, that's one of our key pieces, is really using the data to inform decisions that we're making. And then we're continuing to train staff on techniques such as TIPS, team-initiated problem solving. That is really where you form a problem statement, you take a look at the data, you keep refining those questions deeper and deeper until you really kind of get the heart of what the question is. Oftentimes the question you start with looks different when the team has a chance to really look at the data, ask clarifying questions, and then they really hone in on what is one or two things that seem to be impacting this the most. The other that we're trying to implement school district-wide is AIM, Assess, Intervene, and Monitor. This tool will help us determine the functions of a behavior, because if we don't understand why a student is doing the behavior that they're doing, then oftentimes we will put corrective actions into place that actually may make the situation worse, not better. So through a focused technique, we can try to get to why the student is doing the behaviors that they're doing, and then we can come up with effective strategies to try to deal with that. What I love about this triangle, and it looks a little different than some of the PBIS triangles you've seen before, is it really hits upon the point that Tier 1 universal supports, preventative things that we do with all of our students, need to continue even when we add targeted and intensive supports. We don't take away the universal supports at the time that we're going deeper in and targeting with some more specialized interventions for learners. And then, and then when we really need to get intensive with some of our community-based organizations, that's on top of what we're doing in the targeted and the universal. As you noticed earlier, and I pointed out, middle school has been something that has been on our radar, and we've been watching, and we've been strategizing, and we've been listening to what the schools were saying about what their needs were at the middle school level and what we might be able to do differently. And we're doing a number of things differently this year in terms of middle school. Some Best Starts for Kids grants came open that seemed to fit right in with what we were hoping to do at the middle school level. And so we went for those. The school, we started with some trauma grants that we had last year around restorative practices that allowed all of our middle schools, along with our safety officers, to be trained on restorative practices and continued to be supported in those practices this year as they learned to do them better. The other one was our school, our SBIRT grant that we've talked about, which is the screening, the brief intervention, the refer to treatment, which has allowed us to build up some of our community partners that we already had and bring them on board. So really we're focusing on the Tier 1 supports at the middle school by bringing in the brand new second step social emotional curriculum. It's an online curriculum, totally up to date, just started. And so that is being done at all of the middle schools. Restorative practices training and implementation. Remember that restorative practices is one of the key pieces to that, is the relationship building aspect of it. If you can't repair relationships that are not there, and therefore is really important when you're doing restorative practices to really focus and be intentional about building those relationships from the very start. We are doing Swiss implementation at all the middle schools, and what Swiss allows us to do is to track small behaviors, the minor behaviors, and we use those minor behaviors to make targeted decisions and systems decisions, and hopefully put things into place that will prevent certain things from happening. Eventually, we will be doing the universal screeners, and we'll have more word on those later in the fall when we have more information and we figure out a plan to do those. And then as part of the SBIRT grant, all of our middle schools are getting some really targeted trauma-informed training. And so they will be much better at identifying students in trauma and then identifying the practices you use when students are in trauma. Tier 2 supports include prevention intervention services for substance abuse issues through Kent Youth and Family Services, mentoring being increased through our communities and schools partners who will have at least half-time case managers in all of our middle schools. We'll be doing student groups. We'll be doing check-ins, check-outs. We'll be reteaching and role-playing those CEL strategies, those social-emotional learning strategies they're learning in their second step. And then we have our Tier 3 supports in terms of mental health counseling through Valley Cities, which is now in all middle schools, and our case management through communities and schools, and then our substance abuse consultation for kids that are identified with substance abuse issues through our Kent Youth and Family Services partners. So we are really throwing a lot of services and a lot of kind of systems changing around to the middle schools right now. And what we are hoping is that 2-3 years down the line, when SPERT has finally kind of come to the end of the 3-year grant, we will be very good at identifying what parts of it really worked well and which ones we need to continue to do and which ones maybe, not so much. So that is where we are. Any questions?
Yes. So I have a few. Thank you, Randy.
Oh, yeah.
So I think what I would like to see is, because I do see your frequency of out-of-school exclusions, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see it a little bit more specific to the disproportionality, because we see, of course, it still exists, and in some areas it's gotten larger. And I know we continue to see this, and I guess for me, what I haven't seen is I hear about the student supports, I hear about trauma-informed practices. What I haven't heard is the adult behavior, because most of these happen, of course, in the subjective, right? So the disruption, defiance, those areas. So I'd really like to see and hear about what is happening with our adults. What type of professional development are we giving to our adults? I attended and presented at an SEL symposium at Highline over the summer, and one of the things they talked about is the fact that sometimes trauma is just showing up who you are. Because people respond, and there's a lot of data that shows, in particular African-American young men, how people respond to them can cause trauma.
Right.
So what are we doing to address those issues? Because it's obvious that there's a lot of that disproportionality happening. And I would like to see it a little bit easier than this. I'd like to see it in not necessarily percentages, but for example, in those same instances, do we break down the data where we can say, okay, we had a certain number of students commit the same offense, and what the percentage of, or what the ratio is of those students being suspended versus other subgroups of students? Does that make sense? So for example, if you have an Asian student who commits an offense,
Right.
and you have an African American and a Latino, and what is the proportionality of how many times does that African American student get suspended versus how many times that Asian student gets suspended?
Right.
So I'd like to see that. And I also would like to see the numbers by school, because I'm interested in whether or not this is happening in these subgroups among our more diverse schools or our less diverse schools. So I'd like to see it in that way.
Okay. Addressing your training aspect, absolutely agree. I was at that same symposium in Highline that you were at. I think one of the things that's great, especially for our middle school, at least at this point, is the trauma-informed training that will be taking place. And so when people understand a little more about trauma, that includes what strategies adults can use when working with students in trauma. And so, and in addition to that, I know there are a number of buildings that have gone out on their own and done some of that. I know East Hill Elementary, for one, had a whole thing that they had this summer where they brought in some people around trauma-informed practices, and Dr. Patrick paid for his whole staff, everyone, teachers, recess, everyone to come and learn those strategies, because you're absolutely right. So, yes, we need restorative practices. Those are adults learning those strategies, and that is where we will get the most bang for our buck, when we invest in the adults that are working with our kids, because they are directly impacted by how we are dealing with a situation. So.
Yes, and so trauma-informed practices is one thing, but understanding what you bring to the situation.
Right.
It's not just about the trauma that's there. It's about how are you showing up in a situation, and are you potentially contributing to the trauma or what's happening with the kids, and what that personal piece looks like,
right.
which isn't always covered in trauma-informed practices.
And my
right.
understanding from King County, who is setting up the training around the trauma-informed piece there, is they are focusing on that piece. So I'm hoping that that is the case.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Do we have anything that's focusing on it, looking at intrinsic bias, individuals' intrinsic bias in PD? I know we've sort of talked about it in the past, but I don't know if there's anything that's, that goes
Implicit
to
bias,
what
right.
you're saying. Yeah, implicit bias. Yeah,
Right. Not specifically in terms of discipline, no. Not that I can speak to.
In any area of the district, has anyone ever looked at implicit bias or done any testing or done any professional development around implicit bias in the district?
So Randy, I'm going to say not at least as far as I know, we've not done a full-scale implicit bias training, but there is, I would say, implicit bias aspects of equity work, obviously, but not a full implicit bias training. There are online versions that I know that are available from a wide-scale standpoint. That is an area I know we need to obviously move further into and deeper into with our adults. And I appreciate the line of questioning. Starts with us.
Also, on the exclusionary discipline for specifically middle school, well, hang on, I'll jump into that one first. Who is responsible for teaching the second step in middle school? Was it social studies teachers, health teachers?
No, the intent is for it to be taught by teachers. In most cases, it's done through an advisory type period. And so it's important that teachers, as we've been emphasizing at the elementary level for a number of years, that is a little ahead on the second step, is that in order to get the full impact of the program, the teachers need to be teaching this so that they can reinforce those strategies in the classroom once they've been taught. That is one of the key pieces to teaching the second step curriculum.
So do we know what the buy-in is from advisory teachers?
You know, it's just starting, so that is something that we will be looking to measure. There were 2 schools that actually have been piloting it last year. It was Meridian Middle and Northwood, and from what I've understand from those schools, that there was a fair amount of buy-in. There's always going to be a few that are not necessarily or standing back and waiting and seeing how it's all working. But my understanding is that the program is easy to use. They find it much more relevant than the kits that were there before, and that kids seem to be receptive to a lot of the lessons.
Also, going back to the exclusionary discipline, on the MTSS outlook, after will be second year, we're looking at a 3-4 year rollout. I can't remember what we said that was.
We built a 5-year plan. Yeah, so this is year 2 of the district implementation. You start with 5. It doesn't mean we're going to be done in 5 at 5. Then we adjust, and now that, hopefully by 5, almost everyone's on board. It's been going fairly well in all the schools, and then you rewrite the plan and you make a plan for your next 5 years.
Right, so if we wanted to, it's hard to hold that as the only variable on changing the discipline, but it's going to be kind of a slow process of maybe a decrease, hopefully.
Right. And remember that multi-tiered systems of support is a framework. And so it's a framework that allows a lot of individuality around each school developing strategies and techniques that work for their school. And so.
But it's still a common language.
Yes.
So that if a student moves from one school to another, that language is going to be the same.
Right. If we're having a district-wide meeting and we're talking about tier 2 strategies, everybody should understand what a tier 2 strategy is. Yeah.
Thanks, Randy.
Okay.
So I have kind of a different question, and I'll ask it and then I'll try to clarify it. So I'm looking at your next steps. You're talking about a special focus on middle school because the data is there. You got a high incidence or a third of suspensions for only 2 grades. But I want to understand, have you looked at or considered, is there any structural issues that play into that? Meaning, the way that we've chosen to split the grades by school might contribute to additional discipline in middle school.
Right.
Specifically thinking about, I have my lens as a parent, and I think, okay, in middle school, you have 2 grades. Half of them were in elementary school for the last maybe 7 years. The same teacher team, the same principal, maybe the same kind of expectations about discipline. And then half of them are going into high school next year, which focuses on, the whole team there. They focus on credit achievement, things like that. So that just the nature of having only 2 grades in middle school, how much does that contribute to the increased discipline incidents?
Yeah, I think that always has to be part of the conversation. I think everything needs to be part of the conversation. Definitely the structure that we have could be contributing. The work we're doing around transitioning both in and out could be part of that process as well. I think that's, and those are conversations that we have with middle school principals. And so, yes, those could all be contributing factors.
Well, and I just want to like how much have you tried to help separate it between here is just, every 2 years you get a whole new class of kids in middle school. And so you're having to establish those discipline expectations that don't necessarily equate to what they had in elementary school, and how much coordination is there to set them up for success in high school when it comes to those behavior expectations or discipline standards.
Right, absolutely. I mean, we are unique in our district having it be a 2-year. Most middle schools are 3-year structure where they transition and then some more time to transition, build relationships. So that definitely could be contributing.
And I would say if you haven't, or if you haven't looked at the data, I'd like to just see something about it to say, or have really you guys look at it and say, here's what is maybe a baseline, and here's what is because of how much turnover there is in a 2-grade school.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to see what causes what. I mean, I think you have to look at every piece there, and then you try to work within the pieces and maybe try to adjust certain parts of your system and see if that has impacts. And that's what we're hoping to do, especially with our expert model and trying to do some of those things.
To your question, Ross, and it is a fascinating scenario when you think about 2 years. We've talked about this on many different levels, from an academic standpoint to a behavioral standpoint. While what Randy said is true, it may be hard to draw a singular conclusion about why a behavior does or does not occur. I can tell you that because of that reality, some of our elementary schools are taking a proactive measure to set up our 6th grade students for success by mimicking, or at least preparing them for what the transition could or should look like at middle school. So there are some behavioral practices that are in place. But I think we can certainly look at the data and do our best to draw at least a correlation. It could be 2 years, could be behavior.
And that with also, because we look at what we're doing, the special focus, the goal is to either reduce incidents or reduce the disparity by demographic, but understanding that if we don't, there may be some level inside the structure that we can address without taking it a much broader view.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So when you were talking about that, I know with academics, right, we've looked at our 6th grade and how do we make sure that our 6th graders have that. So I guess along that line, what I think I heard you say was that we're also starting to look at that from our 6th graders and expectations of behavior as compared to what it is at the middle school, to help align that a little bit more.
Right.
And on restorative justice,
Yes.
so is that now across the district, or is it still just in pockets, or what's the training plan look like for that?
Right. It's in pockets, except for now, middle school. What we've been trying to do with the middle school, as we were noticing some of these trends, is to try to do some things as a system across the middle schools. And so we said, if we're going to embark on the restorative practices, we want them getting similar trainings, similar support afterwards as they're trying to use them out in their schools. And so, as I said, we brought in the safety officers, which was actually great. It was a great part of the training because we've done some work restorative practice with just safety officers, but it's great to have them actually having conversations with counselors and teachers and administrators who are also doing this work, because you dig into it at a deeper level. And they appreciated hearing some of the views of the safety officers and where they're coming from. So I think the more that we can bring multiple levels together to do some of this training, then the better off we're going to be.
I guess I would be curious, and I know you don't have it now, to know that in the schools where we have done that, like implemented restorative practices, in those particular schools, are we seeing any decrease on our disciplinary actions in those? And I don't expect you to answer it tonight, but just something that I would be curious to know as you look more, because I know you look at the individual schools, but where we know we've already put some things into place, what types of, are we seeing what we expected to see in those schools?
So, Randy, I just want to say I think it's really great that we are just putting it out there that we have a lot of room for improvement, and I feel like this is the first time we've really laid it out where we're not buffering or hiding anything. But that said, I do think one of the things that that I appreciate that we're doing is we're leveraging our partnerships, with our community organizations. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that you're working with our cities, because that's huge. That hasn't been a practice in the past. And so I'm hearing great things about your work with the city and your support.
Thank you.
So, unless we collaborate on this and we attack this as a community, we're just never going to make any substantive changes. So I just want to acknowledge that. And then the final thing is I'd like to kind of see, as we move forward, and maybe we're going to be doing this, but looking at how all of the incidents fall under the tiers, the different tiers, so that next year, we can look and see, in what area are most of our kids in? Are they in Universal? Are they in Targeted?
Right.
And so also kind of demonstrate the effect of our community organizations,
Right.
How are they having an impact on these tiers? So that's something I'd like to see next year.
Great. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, Randy.
All right. Next, we are going to have Mr. Tim Kovich talk to us about our safety report. Quarterly report. Thank you.
President Vengadaslam, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Halley. Our safety activity report is a annual review of the 2017-2018 school year. You heard some highlights that were also given by Randy Heath that we partnered with in some of our noteworthy items. Mentioning the restorative justice training, that was great that all of our safety officers, not only the middle schools, but all of our high school officers actually participated in that. Again, we're trying to continue to bring that out farther as we work into all grade levels. But that was a great training for them. Our Deputy Karen Davey, as president of the WSSO, the Washington School Safety Organization, presented some trends with us during our academy over the summer, and some findings from that, working on better streamlining threat assessment and some other practices we already use, but that was a big focus for us. Covington Police Chief McCurdy gave up his time again to help us with lead training, which is listening and explaining with equity and dignity. It's basically a practice of a term often used as a community-oriented policing, getting back to know the people that you are around, getting to know where they come from, building those relationships so that when you have those interactions, there's a better outcome. And that was a great day held over at Kentwood for all of our officers. And then we did a couple days of community emergency response training with the Puget Sound Fire Department. That is something the Kent School District has done in the past, several years ago, where we work on emergency preparedness training to work with incident command structure. And we kind of got down to the basics there with our officers to help train and work with our staff back in the schools. We didn't stop doing safety work over the over the summer. We had a lot of our sites. I think there were 30 plus or more with programs going on. So we were out and about doing that. And one of the other emphasis we did was for 4th of July. We worked with Covington Police and the Kent Police in protecting our assets out there, doing all-night patrols for that. And I think we have no damage to report, and pleasant people in the community, so that was good. We continued to work with our security enhancements and our ongoing access control and camera systems at our schools, completing all of our elementary schools. Additions with our new Covington Elementary, we added 38 cameras over there. And we did some enhancement at the middle and high school. This was all planned with the original project and the reallocation of the bonds from, I believe it's 2013. And that's continuing into the new builds with the multipurpose rooms and the new buildings. Again, I'm happy for all of our schools, all of our administrators for scheduling, and all of our staff to take part in our 100% compliance with all our emergency drills. Huge success. I don't know if I'm repeating myself or not on this one, but they are working really hard to get this done, and this is tough to do with all the state requirements, but it is the training for students, for staff, and they are taking great part in it. So it totaled out a total of 543 total drills for all of 2017 and 2018 school year. That's quite a bit. So now moving on to the data of looking at a snapshot of the entire year in the 6 categories in which you normally see. The categories that you normally see are use of force, gang-related activity, drugs and alcohol, use of restraints, assaults on staff, and student assaults. This slide is a little condensed than normal from what you see. This is looking at the males involved in these incidents. And as we look at use of force, relatively low across the year. You're going to start to see in these graphs, there is a trend that we've been noticing by looking at this data. And I think you probably picked up on it. I know we've commented in the past. We kind of have a honeymoon period. Things just get started in September, and then we get an October spike. And we do see that in our incidents with use of force. There's 4. The numbers, and I'm not sure if I've explained, the numbers that you're represented here, there's a number on the top which represents the incident over each column. Then you have a total number of students that are involved, and then the number below are the unique students. So you're going to actually see a repeat of the students that are there. As we move through that, we go relatively low, 1 to 2 as throughout the year, and then the last few months, 0 on that. Gang-related, very low. The majority of our gang-related incidents are graffiti. That's where we end up finding that. It's not that popular we don't often see gang violence. That's not something we typically see in the schools. We just see someone who is represented or this graffiti piece. Drugs and alcohol is where a lot of our incidents we see the higher numbers. 12 the first month, and then we jump to 19. We reduce into November into 9, and then it stays around the 13 and 11, and then it slowly drops as we get to the end of the year. Use of restraints starts out low, and then it stays pretty even between the 2 and the 3 across. Those are often, as a result, the use of force and restraints are usually the same incidents when they occur. Assaults on staff. This is the safety officer's interactions on assaults on staff. So this is not the same representation as you see the 140 or so with the elementary. This is a safety officer involvement here. And then the student assaults. Starts out slow, we get a small spike. We're still looking into why we had such a large increase in this one category in January, right there in that month. Trying to review the specifics on that one, but the remaining goes pretty much the same through 3. The next slide is female. Not as many represented. In female. As you look through, moving into the drugs and alcohol, it's relatively low. We have a spike with 11 incidents there. Use of restraints low, only 3 throughout the year, and only 1 on assaults on staff. And then this is this is the total incidents. So it's an all category when we're looking at those across each month. Moving over again to the drugs and alcohol, the spike is pretty consistent. It stays even, and then the slow drop, that's pretty much the same for male and the female. This is a race, excuse me. This is monthly trends by race. There's going to be 2 slides on this because we could not get all the data using our tool to represent those. There's going to be 2 slides, and this is September through January in these categories, looking at all of the incidents and the race ethnicity of which represents those same categories, meaning use of force incidents, restraints, assaults on staff, students, gang, and drug. And then this is the closing of the year in the, in the same. Hispanic Latino seems to be some of our larger numbers. Excuse me. And this is new because we're comparing 3-year trend back in all of that data. So in the orange, you're seeing 2015-16. In the dark blue, that's 16-17. And the light blue is last school year of 2017-18. We see us pretty close in numbers and incidents, but it does reduce in use of force and restraints just by a little. It's about the same as we're moving into staff on assaults, looking at the last 3 years. We were low in 2015-16 on the student assaults. We increased from a 38 count up to a 53 incident count, and then we stayed last year at a 50, so we were about the same as the year before. Gang-related is about, again, even. Drugs was interesting. We were at 125 incidents back in 25-16. It stayed pretty close at 120 incidents, but then we jumped this last year to 156 incidents. Interesting point on that with the unique students and amount of individuals that were involved. So that 156 resulted in 215 individuals contacted during that time. But of those 215, I believe it's 183 or 2 is what that represents. So we had the repeat of students involved in there. So really we were only contacting 180, 82 to 83. I'm having trouble seeing that. I'm sorry. And so that is that's our last slide. So any questions?
Do we want to start this way, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So is it possible to get any of the breakdowns to look at annually across the different levels, like elementary, middle, high school? So just curious, are we seeing different spikes in different areas that way?
Yes, I believe we can. And I have to give kudos to Mark Terry, who works in IT. We spent about 3 days trying to condense our tool to work to do what we did here. He did a fabulous job. I know we can work with him and try and do that again. So we'll see what we can do.
Okay, I appreciate that. It would just be, I'm just curious, right, if we're seeing any spikes in any particular, as we know with discipline, right, we're seeing a spike in middle school. So are we seeing
And we
that
know we
same
can get it
spike?
to schools, correct? We already have some other things we've been working with this, so we can identify every school and their count. In our categories, yes, we can. The the design and look of that, we'll see what we can do. Yes.
Then are we doing anything differently this year because of things that we saw or learned from last year?
We are doing more along the lines of working with Randy Heath's group in the multi-tiered systems, our officers getting involved, trying to become part of that team, to work with the same terminology, to work with the same groups. More and more, that's been successful. Anecdotally, in the interactions with our safety officers, they've been able to say, I have less of a challenge with this student because I've had these. And we're continuing our mentoring relationship programs. It's kind of it's a have to when we're doing that monthly reporting on that and trying to show those successes, not only in, it's not as easy to put that in a number, but for us, we're trying to do a little bit more storytelling, and you're possibly going to be seeing more of that storytelling success on what that looks like, and trying to get the viewpoint from the student in those interactions. So we're looking at different ways of trying to share that story. So we'll see. So.
Thank you.
And kind of on the line, I especially want to look more about that, this drugs and alcohol that we're looking at here. It's the only kind of big spike. Incidence is like 30% up, but even when you look at unique substance, it's 15% higher than last year. But kind of understanding where that is. Is it in the places where it was already, or is it incidents in new places with locations, demographics, whatever that is? Are there new incidents in places we hadn't seen them before, and every other level staying the same? Trying to understand, unpacking that, where is that coming from, evenly across the board, or some specific area we can target with?
And are you interested in seeing that in similar to this? So I'm comparing the last 3 years and trying to identify the locations of where those are within those last 3 years and see.
Yeah, and kind of especially see where the growth is coming from. Is
Okay.
it coming from a growth in a bucket that had incidents before, or is it new incidents that in places that didn't have them before? And we're looking at maybe there's an area where we hadn't put as much, whatever it is, presence, awareness, training, learning, and then now they're seeing this increase.
Yeah, we'll take a look.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Kovich, I remember we used to have it by school, right? By elementary and middle. I think we deleted it.
You're
right?
absolutely correct. That was the one change. As we're looking at some of these slides here, we used to have a section, a graph across the bottom there.
I asked for that, I remember.
This
So
is the
it's
one
there
time, because we
somewhere.
looked at the annual piece, we had to modify a little bit. We have that data.
I got you.
We'll try and pull and show more, for sure.
I'm just looking at the emergency drills. I am pleased to see that there were 46 lockdown drills in the first 3 months of school. That's something I've really been pushing for, is to get those lockdown drills practiced early in the school year, and so it really looks like we did that. So that's, kudos to the schools. Would you just give us a quick definition of the difference between lockdown, modified lockdown, shelter in place, and tabletop?
Sure.
25 words or less?
I will do my best. All right, so a lockdown is when a situation is happening either right on the campus or in the building. It's where we lock all the doors, we hide in the dark, we move away from windows, and there's announcements and resources coming, and you stay there. If you need to, at some point, implement the run, hide, fight piece, if the threat is in your area, that is something that we teach during that time, and then you wait for an all clear. You're silencing cell phones, that sort of thing. Try and put containment and walls and barriers between. If not, then we run away and we move away from that threat. I blended a little bit into, again, the run, hide, fight, but the lockdown is the containment piece. Modified lockdown, that is when there's an active or there's a threat nearby the school but not directed at the school, so we put a protective bubble around that. It is lock exterior, business as usual inside the building, teaching and learning still going on. We just modify some of the movement, no outside activities. That's that. Shelter in place, that's going to be for when we have, again, an outside situation. Usually it could be like a chemical spill, a train derailment, something that might impact that natural disaster similar to a volcano with ash. We seal up it's kind of like a modified lockdown. we seal up our exterior, and then we shut down the HVAC system down. So we don't want bad air coming in, and we work with local authorities on when it's safe to do all of that. Tabletop. Core group of staff members who are decision makers come together at a table, and they break down a part of an emergency. They work out a plan, and then they put that into either our rapid responder web-based mapping and planning website, or they just put it on paper. And so they keep debriefing little sections on how to improve parent reunification or a transportation plan after a lockdown, that type of thing.
So that doesn't involve the students, that's just the adult
Correct.
planning.
Tabletops is the staff and or that core group. Yes.
Also, about the camera locations, the putting new cameras in, what percentage of them are internal in the building, and what percentage are external? I mean, you may not have that exactly.
Percentage I don't have, but what we do try to cover is they're inside the building in all common areas. So we do an office sign-in location for parents when they arrive, major entrances into the hallways. We cover the exits and entrances in the halls to student bathroom locations, and then stairwells, if at all possible, not in gyms, and not in classrooms. Outside, key points, drop-offs, parent pickups, playground locations, and then we try to use some locations that if there are those outside influences, we can monitor that coming when we're in the lockdowns or modified lockdowns. So we have some high areas with movable cameras on most sites.
Good, all right, thank you, that was
Okay.
all. Thanks a lot.
Yes, I only had a question about the counseling that's happening for drugs and alcohol, substance abuse, and if we've seen any changes with our providers from years past to now. You know, do you see anything changing? Because it's just going up, and is it lack of, being in enough schools, lack of resources? What do you, any sense?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I don't have that answer. I know that our officers work with the counselors, and I know that referrals are done, and there's a lot of communication that happens between the groups along with administration. The other pieces I just don't have an answer for that right now. Oh, hey.
Hey. So we continue to maintain a contract with Kent Youth and Family Services for any time a student is found to be in an infraction around drugs and alcohol at the school. The parents are given an option of having an assessment done at no expense to them. So that continues for all of our secondary schools. It is not an option for elementary school because the screener that they use at Kent Youth and Family is not valid for elementary age students.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Mr. Coates. Appreciate it.
President Venkatachalam and members of the board, actually all of the questions that were asked were all great questions as always, and they're also related to data. I want to make sure that what we are hearing and seeing today, first of all, is a recognition of hard and smart work by many of our team members. And as I think about organizational effectiveness, and Deshaun Christie is also here and his team as Executive Director of Organizational Effectiveness, looking at specifically at data visualization and actualization. So the questions you've asked about how to view data, we are getting closer to maximizing the use of our Tableau server so that, yes, we'll have snapshots of data sets so that you and the attending public will be able to see data. Most importantly, how can we play in the sandbox so you can ask the questions on your own and be able to see data sets in a way that will answer some of the questions that you have, and then provide information, and then help us tell our story. Good, bad, or indifferent. That's what data should help us do. So I look forward to that. Absolutely.
Thank you. Great. All right, we're up to 3.01, our 3.0 Board of Directors discussion and approval, and we are up to inclusive education out-of-district placement contracts. And I am going to ask for a motion to approve Resolution Number 1548, approving the authorization for sale and issuance of unlimited general tax general obligation bonds. Is there a motion?
Sorry, I'm not clear.
That's not on 3.01.
It's not on the agenda.
No, I apologize.
Nope.
I must not have removed that from the last meeting.
Sorry.
3.01.
To be clear then, did we
What's
already approve that
3.01?
last week?
Yeah.
Last
Yeah, we
time?
approved
It
that
sounds like
last
we already did that, if it was the bond. That was good.
I apologize.
That's
I
okay,
think
that's
they're
all right,
on
that's
the
all right. Let's go back to the computer. Okay, 3.02.
We'll start with,
Should we go back to 3.01? But it says inclusive education out-of-district placement contracts.
Right, right.
That's it.
Oh, I was reading the, sorry, okay, got it. All right, I would like to have a motion, sorry, that's all confusing now, to use out-of-district placements for students that have been evaluated, and the district has determined that for these students with disabilities, no appropriate program exists. And so the program cannot be reasonably established in the district, and no appropriate program can be contracted with another district. So we are approving out-of-district placement, OSBI-approved non-public agencies, totaling $419,000 for the 2018-19 school year.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, all those in favor say, or are there any discussions, questions?
I just had a question of if this is the first time we're contracting with these entities, the Highline College Achieve and the Gersh Academy. This is the first time we're contracting with them, or are they the same ones that we have done in prior years?
Feel free to,
If anyone knows.
thank you to know. And Jennifer Jones, thank you.
Good evening, Board. No, this is not the first time that we are working with Highline. And with some of the other out-of-district placements, sometimes they're a result of a settlement or an agreement that's been reached.
Okay.
I can certainly speak to Gersh Academy. We have two students there, and that they were there last year. And then for Highline, I do believe that's an increase of students there at 15 students, and that is essentially, we have the top program for our students now from 18 to 22, and then, or to 21 when they age out at 22. And then this program at, it's called Achieve at Highline Community College, and it's a pre-college experience looking at students that need, can work on some more independent skills, but they are working on different life skills than those students that are in the top program. So it's an additional opportunity for those students.
And it's sort of like confirming what I thought, we used these in the past as past placements. We'd approved them before.
Correct.
Looking at the needs of these students, these programs, these placements are appropriate for them this year, and then we need to approve them again.
Yes, they're all determined by the IEP teams. Yes. Thank you.
Any others? All right, calling for a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. All right, motion passes. 3.02, inclusive education staffing contracts. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the inclusive education staffing contracts totaling $4.4 million for the 2018-19 school year with contractors Nursing Evolutions, Salai Blazerworks, and Maxim Behavioral Staffing.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Are there any discussions or questions?
I have similar questions. Specifically about Solient Blazer Works, 38 contractors. If we've used them before, how does the number of contractors and the positions we need compare to last year? It seems like an increase. We're talking about 9 speech language pathologists, 13 teachers, 8 occupational therapists. How does that compare to what we've needed in the past?
It's a great question. Historical data, I would have to look at that. We do see an increase of this critical needs area of needing to work with our outside agencies to fill those positions and our areas of inclusive ed, especially for our speech therapist, OT, occupational therapist, physical therapist. And so we are reaching out to BlazerWorks, which is and essentially, I think of them as a broker. They're our one point of contact that can reach out to several, many different agencies to help us staff according to our needs.
From what you know, is any increase related to additional identified specific needs from students, and therefore they have those needs, we need to fill those people? Or is this positions that were covered by hired staff employees here, we cannot hire them, and then now we have to increase with this contractor?
Great questions. All right, so for BlazerWorks and Soliant, let me make sure that, can we scoot down to the next one so I can just see the, thank you. All right. Yes. Okay. So Maxim Behavioral Solutions. So that particular contract is working with individualized needs of students. So if a child needs additional behavioral support, then that would be IEP driven based on the needs in the IEP, the Individualized Education Program. The staffing for Soliant and BlazerWorks are for our FTE allotted staff that we need to fill, that we post those vacancies. And so some are by individualized needs per the IEP, and then for the others, those are openings that we have in the district that we need to fill in those critical need areas.
Gotcha.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm Jennifer Jones, by the way, Executive Director of Learning Supports. Okay, thanks.
I have a question too.
Don't go yet.
All
Don't
right,
go anywhere.
I'm back.
And I asked these in email, and I don't know that, I looked earlier today and I didn't think I got an answer. On the Maxim and the Soliant, there's no date that's 2018, it's 2017, and there's nothing saying that this is where we're, that we've got it
Right.
heading.
Okay.
No,
You want to
no,
take this
Steve,
one? I can take it. Either one of us. I think either one of us could.
Certainly. One of the things with our current policy is that if a contract is automatically renews at the end of the year, or if the contract has already been established, that we might not necessarily post the new contract, but we've had some conversations internally about that being a practice that we are taking on moving forward. And it is one of our upcoming updates for policies and procedures around that practice. So you will see the details and the procedural guidelines around that in our meeting in October.
Good, thanks.
And I had a question about, are these positions remaining posted as open in our district? And if they are filled, then what happens with these contracts? Are we obligated? What does that look like?
So we're always looking for Kent employees for these agency-filled positions, and certainly we continue to try to fill those positions with a Kent employee.
Right, and so if we do, say mid-year, what happens with the persons that we've already contracted with through these agencies? Are their contracts terminated, or what does that look like?
So far, we have needed all of the staffing, but Mariah, do you want to speak to that?
Well, then we're looking at look more at the contract language. So are we definitely having to outlay this money, or say this is the maximum if we needed them all the time, and then we pay them by the amount of services we need?
I believe.
We do have a 30-day clause that we could end those agreements, and we make that very clear with our agencies that we are posting and seeking to hire.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
All right. No more questions? And, yes, Ross asked my questions. So Hearing no more discussions or questions, I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Okay, motion 3.02 passes. 3.03 is our state transitional bilingual instructional program grant. I'd like to ask for a motion for the board to approve the new agency contracts totaling, excuse me. 3.03 is our state transitional bilingual instructional program grant, asking for a recommendation to approve the grant, I-grant. Is there a motion, please?
I so move.
I'll second.
All right. Are there any discussions or questions? I have one.
Yeah, I had one as well.
All right, go ahead,
I
Debbie.
was just curious because it says the due date was July 3rd, so I was confused.
Yes, so this particular grant was submitted on July 3rd, so it was submitted in time for the due date. I think this is the first time that it's been put up for board approval.
Thank you for that clarification.
My question had to do with the translation and interpretation. Because the costs are not broken down, I'm just wondering how we use those grant funding. How do we use the translation and interpretation? Can it be used for a wide variety of reasons or just for that particular instructional program?
Mr. Valen, thank you.
I can help with that. The State Transitional Bilingual Grant cannot be used for translations, nor can Title III, which is the accompanying federal grant for students that qualify for services. However, we do have a requirement that we are to communicate in whatever language that is, and so we do use either interpreters or translated services. Some of the pieces that are like the home language survey and among other things, programs, screeners, things like that. We do that.
I did see in the grant that we can actually use it, so did I miss?
It is not.
It's specifically stated.
Yes, however, we do not use that for translated services. We use all of our state bilingual dollars for our staffing. And I think that we talked a little bit about that at a work session when we had our dual language work session about use of the dollar. So all of our dollars do go toward that staffing.
All right, thank you.
And PD, yeah.
All right, any other questions, comments? Hearing none. I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Okay, motion 3.03 passes. Up to 3.04, our second reading and approval of Policy 2145, Suicide Prevention. Is there a motion to approve Policy 2145?
I so move.
Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussions, questions?
I mean, this is the second reading, so we've seen the first reading and went through it. Assuming there's no changes since that we've seen it last, but if there are, speak to those.
I'm sorry, this one didn't have a change. This was a new policy with the state, and so this one went through as is, and so there are no changes from that previous, and so I kind of figured that.
Thank you.
Just gonna hang out here until we're done with it.
Yes. So I'd like to call for a vote for 3.04, Policy 2145.
I so move. Oh, no, sorry.
Sorry, all those in favor say aye. It's not me this time.
Aye.
Me this time, aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. All right, motion passes. And we are up to 3.05, second reading and approval of Policy 2161, Special Education and Related Services for Eligible Students. Is there a motion for the board to approve the revised policy?
I so move.
Is there a second, please?
I'll second that.
All right, are there any questions, comments? Right, hearing none. I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion passes. Up to 3.06, second reading and approval, policy 2410, graduation requirements. I'd like to have a motion to to approve policy 2410, graduation requirements.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, are there questions or discussions?
I just wanted to clarify, we're looking at, because this just itself just mentions the 3 requirements, but talks about the accompanying procedures. I don't specifically see those here, but I just want to know if those have been updated as well, consistent with what we've talked about at the updated requirements.
So yes, there was a little bit of further development on the graduation requirement procedures due to our Core 24 waiver and some other suggestions that are aligned with our accountability policy and procedure that are going for a second reading during work session, because it will likely be a third reading before it's approved. And so you'll see that then. But the goal of this at the time when we discussed it was to keep it to what the state was doing and then be specific in our requirements about what Kent expects for graduation, just kind of laying that out in a more explicit way about the types of courses and all of those details, rather than putting that and embedding it in policy and requiring a board adoption every time something changed at the state, even when it changed mid-year. But you will absolutely see that.
Yes, thank you.
Just more of a clarification. So the board did have a work session and reviewed all these policies in great detail. So just want to make sure that that's clear. So.
I just had a question on, and I didn't catch it before, and I don't know if this is incorrect or not, but looking at the graduation requirements, the verbiage, and it starts out with the board will establish graduation requirements, and then at the bottom it talks about the district. District will, who meets, somewhere it says the district will make the requirement decision. And so do we need to make that distinction, whether it's the board or the district that establishes the requirements?
What I would recommend in this and what we actually, so thank you for that. In our encouragement of going through the track changes with the board and going through that and proofreading that way, we did not proofread for clarity of removing all of those changes on the back end to make sure that it read in clear and transparent language for our public and for our staff to actually comply. And so what I would recommend is changing that so the language is consistent and says the board will establish and then established by the board, so it's consistent language in the policy.
Okay.
And so before it is posted for public, I would make that change.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
And thank you, I wanted to address that here, but I had to wait for you to bring that up, so thank you, President Venkatasalam.
So do I, no problem. So do I,
Does she need to rescind in order for us to make a change?
so we need to resubmit?
Yeah. So you have a motion on the floor. You can remove the motion and vote, and then.
Okay, so would anyone like to remove the motion?
I think I made the motion, so I can rescind the motion.
Okay, all right, is there a second? Okay, all right.
Next, we need to
Vote to rescind.
Okay, I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. All right, motion passes.
Clarify out loud what it is we just did.
So you need to so you rescinded the motion.
Yes,
So we need to go ahead and propose the motion with the proposed change.
okay. So I'd like to call for a motion to amend 3.06, policy 2410, graduation requirements with,
To approve
to approve.
with the proposed. So I would like to move that we approve 2410 graduation requirements with the suggested amendment.
And I'll second.
All right. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. All right, motion passes. Okay, going down to 3.07, second reading and approval, policy 3205, sexual harassment of students prohibited. Is there a motion to approve policy 3205?
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, are there any discussions or questions? Hearing none, I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Okay, motion passes. 3.08, approval of uncollectible non-tax revenue. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve 3.08, approval for uncollectible non-tax revenue.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Are there any discussions or questions? I have one.
Well, there's the clarification. We haven't seen this before, but I just want to clarify. I think the last sentence says the last time this board did anything like this was 3 years ago, which also explains why some of these are so old, comparatively speaking. And it looks like basically it's facility use fees, charging community pays a fee to do it. They're uncollectible. Someone lost a viola 8 years ago, things like that. We're just officially writing them off.
Yes, that is the point. And some of the lag is about actually trying to make the attempt to collect the debt and what the right process is for that. And there's always this balance of, do you pursue that in a more formal process and then expend those costs to go through debt collection to recoup pennies on the dollar, that sometimes it creates a larger expense than the original debt. But on the side with facilities use and rental, we've actually had some conversations around the process, procedures, and that balance of what a possible deposit and then payment before or as services are rendered looks like, and how that balances with our community, and what that looks like as well. Because some of these are in our effort to be a community partner and open up our facilities, but it's at a risk of collecting. And then once the event has occurred, it's particularly difficult to have any leverage, so.
Thank you. That was mine.
Yes, I'm just wondering about the first, are we doing this under 1 year? We're writing off if it's under 1 year?
No, it's not about necessarily, there's no particular time limit or time bound to say that we have to write it off over a particular set. It's just after we've reached that it's uncollectible, we've tried to pursue in the pathways that we believe are reasonable. It's
only because I noticed there were some that were just about a year. So
it's because it fell into, since we're bringing them to the board, we just brought all that were on the table, and that we've made attempts to collect and are not seeming to make any headway with that. And so we're now thinking about other strategies, since most of them, as you point out, seem to be around facility use, what we can do with our process to help with some of that on the front end, rather than trying to collect on the back end.
Any more questions, comments? No. Hearing none, I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. All right, motion passes. We are up to our consent agenda, and I'd like to ask the board if you'd like to pull an agenda item for discussion.
Yes, please. I'd like to pull 4.10, 4.10, and 4.11.
Ross, you said 4.10, and then you said 4.10.
Well, just to be clear, 4.10,
Okay,
4.11.
And 4.11, okay. I'd like to add to that 4.12. But, go ahead and start.
4.10?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
wanna
I
approve
need
the
to
others first?
approve- Yes. So I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda minus 4.10, 4.11, 4.12.
I so move.
Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Okay. Motion passes, and Ross, 4.10, 4.11, and 4.11.
4.10, more about, we usually see, stuff in the past we're talking about. This project was already there. It may cost more or less than before. But so this specifically is looking to add a new project. So my question is not necessarily about the project itself, but more about the process for selecting this only project to be the next project funded out of a 2010 bond contingency. something over $2 million, I would expect the board to see a prioritized list of projects and then have input into selecting the one that uses the bond contingency. If that process doesn't exist, what is the process that came up with this as the project to do now?
That's a great question. President Venkatachalam, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Halley. Israel Vela and I had several discussions over the course of the last few months. When the original 2016 bond was devised back in 2012, passed up in 2016, the fields for all the fields in the high schools were only determined to be put back in natural grass. We, in a collective team effort looking around the district, decided that since we didn't have the funding for a synthetic turf field, instead of looking in the future, which we will, for the next bond issue to get them all on the bond issue, we wanted to put a prototype together and where would that project fit. Kent Meridian was the best fit. It's got lights. Historically speaking, I believe last year there were about 58 baseball games that were canceled due to not having a field that could take the moisture from the beautiful Pacific Northwest weather that we have. So we looked at that quite hard and quite long. I understand where you're coming from. Maybe we're only 2 years into a $252 million bond issue, and why would we do this? I think of community. I think of coming back and looking around of what can we do with one project. And this may not be the only project we add to the bond. We have that leverage where we can add projects to the bond. It all depends where our contingency lies, how we come in with the rest of our bond over the next 8 years, generally speaking, to make sure that we can fund all of the promises made, promises kept projects. We felt that this one was very important since it did not get on the 2016 bond.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Is there a project that didn't get on the bond because of whatever criteria? And making sure that we're not deprioritizing another project that someone else might say this should be priority one for the $2 million. And that you've gone across and said, we've looked at all this. Rather than wait for a new bond, we can use the contingency to fund this project, which is, from our discussions and from our community, look, this is the priority. And we've gone through that.
And I'll agree with you. I think as we look forward to our 5-year capital plan, I think that is where we're going to get our most bang for the buck. We know we're going to keep doing capital projects. That's no lie. I mean, what years haven't we done them? There might have been some lag in between, but we know we're always going to have to improve our district, our facilities, our communities. And I'm actually looking forward to the next one. I'm going to start planning for it now.
Director, I also wanted to add, as we looked at our surrounding districts, Auburn, Riverside, I'm looking at Director Daniels, there is a field that is turf, and Tahoma also has turf. We actually will save money in the future because we had to play some of those canceled games on those turf fields, and we paid for that. The only others that we're able to use with our city partners were our fields down the way here off of 132nd, which those are only available whenever they're open. And so this will definitely set us on the right course, right path, and also save us some money.
Thank you. I had the same question as Director Hardy. I also wanted to ask if we can start delineating those contingency amount, in our promises kept website, if we can start listing out, what do we have left? That sort of question that people are going to ask. I'm going to ask. I don't know if we're doing that already, but, the amount of money left in the contingency.
Yes, we actually do that. That's part of finance. Dr. Harmon and her team, Ben, are definitely involved in that. That's something that we always want to look at. We don't want to start spending all the contingency 2 to 3 years in. We know that there's going to be some escalation costs that we've seen across the board. Every school district in the state of Washington, especially for the $7 billion between Olympia and Bellingham just for capital projects, we're seeing an influx of that. I think we're being cautious enough, to be honest with you. I don't think that this is going to hurt us in the long run. I think, again, as we keep thinking about the promises made, promises kept, and getting our a strategic 5-year goal for capital planning to know what our next bond is, that's what I'm looking for. We need to finish this one, and, you know, we have a levy that's going to come out in April. So, you know, that's even more projects that are coming with the $75 million.
Just the more detail, the better it is.
Sure, absolutely. And I think we've actually talked about that during the presentation already, right? So.
And I was just wondering, I've seen the contingency funds, and then on individual projects, there's the undistributed amounts. Is that part of the contingency fund? Or is that something separate? And if you don't use all the undistributed, does that go back into contingency?
Karen, that's great. I'm glad you're looking at our books. Yes, that is absolutely right. In each project, there's an undistributed. So each project has its own contingency built into it. Then the bond, the 2016 bond, had a $10 million contingency bucket that was placed there for anything up and beyond.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And so just kind of saying, we're saying that the 10 million would be up and beyond the price of the existing projects above their contingency. What we're saying is we're comfortable enough taking $2 million of that. We don't need to cover the existing projects. They can finish within their contingency. We're taking $2 million of that and putting it into a new project that wasn't in there before. We're comfortable with that.
I am definitely comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Buzzard. Mr. Long, thank you. More questions?
None on that one.
Okay. 4.11.
4.11.
Yes.
Well, it's the one we rejected the bid last time, which was your recommendation. This is the Suze Creek multipurpose room. You mentioned it there. It looks like it was May 2018. Came in higher. These bids are even or higher than that. So we've kind of run this risk of, yes, this bid is higher. It's, you know, a good 20% higher than what we thought it was going to be. But I just want to kind of hear from you, like, even if maybe recommending to do this now, because what are the risks of waiting? Obviously, the room doesn't get done faster, and is there a risk of increased costs? What do you see as the reason to do it now when 4 months ago at a lower price we said don't do it?
Well, there's always a risk to wait because the way the economy is going right now and the way the amount of projects that are in the Pacific Northwest, our prices are going up all the time. We felt that this was a real competitive bid with the number of people who bid on the project. It's only going to go up, and we have more in the pipeline that need to be handled. These schools are getting these multipurpose rooms because they don't have one to serve lunches in, so they have to eat in the classrooms. So from an operational standpoint, it's a great addition to the schools. But if we postpone it, it's just going to get more expensive.
Yeah. So again, the risk of it being more expensive and then also other things we need to do, other rooms we need to build, not being able to be done by these other groups or being
Well, I think we're asking for, I think, a little over 600,000 for this project. Unfortunately, there's the 4 clone schools like this are all designed the same. Mm-hmm. This project had additional costs because we had to move some portables to put the building in. And then we had a $268,000 bill from Suze Creek Water for area charges that we did not anticipate. And those were the main kicks for this one.
Things that wouldn't go away if we waited longer. Right.
There was no way to get around those.
Okay.
I even argued with Suze Creek about their area charge, and they wouldn't listen.
All right. Well, thank you. That was my questions.
All right. I think you've answered 4.12 for me as well. So at this point, thank you, Mr. Long, Mr. Buzzard. At this point, I'll call for a vote on 4.10, 4.11, and 4.12. All those in favor, say aye.
Calling for the
We'll
motion.
motion first.
Oh, I'd like to call for a motion.
I so moved.
I'll second that.
All right. Now, all those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say no. Motion passes. All right, 5. All right. We are at 5. 5.01, Board of Directors informational. 5.01, summary of changes to procedures. Just a reminder that these are informational. The board will not be taking a vote on any of these items. 5.01, summary of changes. Any comments? 5.02, procedure 2145P, suicide prevention. Any comments, questions? 5.03, procedure 3240P, student conduct expectations. 5.04, procedure 3241P, classroom management.
I did have some questions about that one, and I was wondering, so kind of what we spoke to before around, again, the adult responsibility in some of this. So the policy doesn't, or the procedures don't really speak to, if I remember correctly, I read through it a few days ago, I apologize, speak to kind of what Karen, like anti-bias training, those types of things that would need to be taken into consideration with some of the subjective decisions that happen with regards to disruptive behavior, defiance, those types of things. So I didn't see anything in here that addressed any professional development in here with regards to that. So I'm wondering if that is a part of that, or is there something that can be looked at and can be added into this as far as procedurally?
Randy, you into Thank you, Randy.
Okay, so by design, according to our procedures, we have a committee, a district committee made up of stakeholders that reviews these every year, at least annually, to recommend changes. Those were not discussed and were not made recommendations this time around. However, next time the committee comes together, we'd be happy to consider those and possibly adding those pieces to our procedures.
Yeah, because I see information was added about the student rectifying a relationship, and I just, again, wonder where the adult responsibility falls into some of these things. So.
All right. Okay.
All right. All right, 5 point. Thank you, Randy. 5.05, procedure 4060P, distribution of materials. Comments, questions? No. All right, 5.06, procedure 4130P, parent involvement and family engagement. I want to make a comment. Anyone else? All right. I just want to thank Dr. Harmon, all those who worked on these procedures, because one of the things that I had asked was that we go back to our family engagement committee and our discipline committee and honor the work that was done in the past, and I appreciate that that was incorporated into the procedure language, so thank you for that. Okay, and we will move on to communication from the audience. And we have 2 cards, starting with Jordan Paxton. If you'll come to the podium to my right, and please state your name, address, and any organization you may belong to. That'll be 3 minutes, thank you.
Yes, hi. I am Jordan Paxton. I live at 13707 Southeast 255th Place, and I represent Kentwood High School. And I just wanted to ask if there had been any plans to change when high school students need to come into school, for any possibility that students get more sleep. That is all.
Okay, Jordan, I should have been clear. This is a listening session. And so we don't usually respond, but we will respond back to you.
All right, that's my only question.
Okay, thank you very much. Jordan. Okay, so we will have a staff member touch base with you. Okay, thank you. Christy Padilla, please.
Good evening. I live in Covington, Washington. I'm coming to you tonight as a parent and not as a district employee. So I have a daughter who goes to Kent Lake High School. And I want to address some of the equity issues that are important to us while attending Kent Lake High School. So several people who live in the Kent Lake area some of them tend to decide that Kent Lake might not be the best place for them, and they take their children out and they attend other Kent high schools, which is fine. However, then it creates less student enrollment at Kent Lake High School. And one of the big promotions at Kent Lake High School was that if students take 5 UW classes while attending, they're automatically enrolled, if they get a B or better, into UW Tacoma. They have that opportunity. This year, because there wasn't enough student enrollment, or at least the staffing was reduced, senior UW English was not offered, and so some kids had 4 UW classes. So these are some of the things that happen at this smaller high school. And another issue that has come up is I get that there's some inequity with the education that students are getting because of a small enrollment, and they're not able to offer some of the same opportunities that other high schools are getting. But another piece is that it's still a 4A high school, and it still has to be in operation, and so we still need personnel to operate that high school. Right now, clerical staff it's a school attendance month, and one of the things that happens at Kent Lake High School is the attendance office is shut down for part of the day because of the lack of clerical staff and the inability to be able to shift people around. So kids during that half hour or whatever have to go to the main office to check in if they need to check in or check out, which is fine, except that there is a long line of kids, and so students that may need to utilize the counselor or need to make an appointment with an administrator or make appointments with whatever, they're all waiting in line. And so I guess what I'm asking is, I get that I hear that there are $600 and $700 million houses being built out there. And so eventually, Kent Lake may be able to provide the same type of education that the other high schools are able to provide. But while we're waiting for those white privileged families to move into the neighborhood, perhaps we could at least look at the operational side of Kent Lake High School. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to 6.02, legislative update. Director Hardy, please.
No new legislatives in session, though maybe some of you, they've been out, a lot of our local legislators have been out door knocking, phone calling, so you may have interacted with them as they continue to push for re-election. But what I also want to make sure I highlight in my legislative update is resources that come from the state, from OSPI. They've begun to put out regional-based, but trainings, informational material, meetings available in areas such as special education, specifically transitioning out of high school. And so those resources are available if you want to go out and find them. They're from the state, so they're using your tax dollars. And so it's something that's available relatively in our area with a decent drive. And in the evening. So those are additional resources I want to make sure you're available. The other thing that we have an update is the WASDA Legislative Assembly, which I wasn't able to attend, so I'll defer to President Vengadaslam, who did attend on our behalf, for any update on the WASDA Legislative Assembly.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, I was really fortunate to attend, and I do think moving forward, we have to make a point of having representation there, either whether it's one of us, doesn't matter, but primarily because we have, as a large district, we have quite a bit of influence in the legislative priorities with our, not only our school directors, but also with the state, OSPI, State Board of Education. All of those groups are meeting at the Legislative Assembly. And so I just wanted to kind of go over some of the things that we discussed and were priorities. It was really interesting hearing from our students. There was quite a bit of discussion about safety, and one of the panels that we had was the OSPI State Board of Education, as well as Office of the Governor. And so the priorities that were discussed were really talking about the opportunity gap and looking at the fact that McCleary really didn't do anything to address the opportunity gap. And so quite a bit of discussion went into that, and OSPI is really leading the charge on that. They're also working on professional development and enhancing the new teaching professional models. So they really want to look at industry certification for our teachers and how can teachers get certified for dual credit programs through CTE, and really look at the career connected work piece that OSPI is pushing. And State Board of Education is also on looking at that 24 credit and how can we look at industry opportunities for our kids, especially in the middle schools. Can they accomplish more credits in the middle schools, and can that count towards high school? So there's quite a bit of work going on there and quite a bit of discussions on school safety. And the governor's office was talking also about special education and funding that, and I think as a collaborative, we had to come together and really talk about that as our top priority, because it's been talked about year after year, but we actually have weighted votes, that we can, as a large district, bring up. And so our voice really matters, there. And the special education, we had somebody from the federal network who came, and one of the concerns is that apparently they're saying that all of the policymaking on IDEA and SPED may go back to the states. And so there was a big concern that the federal government is going to rid of their responsibility and all of this is going to come back to the state. So that's something to really pay attention to. And one of the things that I really wanted to bring up is there were proposals that came up from our local school districts that talked about state, the SEBB, which is the State Education, the Benefits Board. And there's a clear indication that this board is not going to be funding staff that are going through our levy, or if they're part-time staff members, and it's a huge concern that we're going to be, I believe in our district, several $1 million. And so one of the districts, Federal Way, actually put that through the last minute as a legislative priority, and so it was great for us to be able to really jump in and support that as well. So anyway, quite a bit of things going on, but we made our priorities, and there were about 15 on the list, and we made sure that SPED is one of them, and this SEBB, and comprehensive school safety. I mean, those are the critical things that we have concerns in our district, so we had a voice there, and so I was really privileged to go there, and looking forward to working with our PTAs as well. They have wanted to, they mentioned that at the Monday meeting, that they want to work with us in kind of going at it as a South King County unit and pitch for several of these issues together, so. All right, so Dr. Watts.
Absolutely, thank you. President Vengadoslam, members of the board, Ms. Halley, community, friends, staff. September is obviously Attendance Awareness Month. The first true month of our school has shown me evidence of strong, high yield, high impact instructional strategies in the classroom, having conversations with teachers, with our support staff, paraeducators, principals, and family members about the positive start to the school year. And we can always be better. At the same time, what I've seen is evidence of common planning time, evidence of planning from our support staff in support of our teachers in the classroom. I've seen evidence of our families who are dropping their children off and not afraid to let their kindergarten students walk out of the car, and that is success. And quite frankly, when we think about families, we think about communities. Most recently, had an opportunity to attend the Kent YMCA board meeting, and I appreciate our Chief Human Resources Officer, Mariah Martin, who accompanied me as a proxy. The reality is we have 1 year from now. 1 year, the doors are scheduled to open for our families. When we think about wellness, when we think about the challenges from a funding standpoint and a capital facilities standpoint that have come about, and less than a year from this point, Labor Day 2019 is the schedule for opening. Had an opportunity this morning to talk with Principal Patty Drobny at Daniel Elementary School and asked her to say if she would be willing to be a part of the board as we move into action, because she is a vital community member. There will be some building challenges, as we know, but she has accepted that challenge and that charge and that responsibility, and I appreciate that. With that, the Kent Y, we've had conversations about the pricing model. We've had conversations about the charter membership and giving. So there still are some needs that need to take place, but that is going to be an area that will support health and wellness for our Kent community. I'd like to also honor the fact that this summative goal of this number, 83.2, now it fluctuates, right? We've been as high as 83.8. 83.2% of our students in the class of 2017-18 graduated or met the requirements for graduation. Now, again, that's a success. That's our highest four-year cohort rate since 2009-2010, where four-year adjusted cohort rate became the standard for graduation rate from USAID. That also means we still have about 17% of our students who are not meeting that requirement, and that is part of our mission. All means all means each. So our work is still obviously yet to be done, but I'm excited about the work that we've just talked about today, quite a bit about data. It's important, not just data itself, but the information and the ability for us to take a closer look at how our students are performing, how our attendance, if our students are there, receiving the education that they need, as well as our staff to support them. So how do we do that? We do that with resources. We know that we have finite resources from the state, from USAID, but we are gaining some resources from one of our own organizations, our Kent Schools Foundation. When I arrived, we had a shell of a foundation, and the people were there and willing and able to work. We did not have the resources. We have just now celebrated our single most profitable foundation event, which is the inaugural Kent Schools Gala. And it is my understanding that after all is said and done, we have close to or a little over $50,000 now in our Kent Schools Foundation to support primarily, to begin with, elementary schools, student, fine arts, STEM activities. And this is just the beginning. So I was proud to be a part of that, certainly proud of those who were on the dais who were a part of that, those who were in the boardroom who were a part of that, and the amazing staff and teams, teachers who emceed, parents and family members who are part of the senior leadership of our foundation. So it's just the beginning. With that, an event that will take place tomorrow that I'm proud to be a part of, that is telling our stories. And so SICK Captain America will be hosting a talk tomorrow at Daniel, speaking of Daniel Elementary School, for students, parents, and teachers to highlight the power of our stories. We've talked about that, how we use data, how we tell our leadership stories. And so through diversity and creative arts fellow at SALDEF, he travels across the United States, and he shares the story of painting a picture of what it means to be an American. And we know through, depending on what literature we see, some may see one individual, may see one shade of melanin in someone's skin, but this is an example that we represent the world in this country. Daniel Elementary School tomorrow at 6:30 to 7:30 in the multipurpose room. I said tomorrow, didn't I? So fast forward. I meant Friday, right. So 2 days from now, September 27th, 6:30 to 7:30. So those who can attend, we certainly welcome your attendance and our continued support of our richly diverse community. That concludes.
Just for clarification, September 27th is tomorrow. Is it the 28th?
It is tomorrow. I apologize.
Okay.
So Thursday, it says Friday. My flyer is incorrect.
Okay.
I will make sure that is changed. So Thursday, it is tomorrow. I do know that. So, yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's Thursday. Yes.
Got it.
Thank you. That now concludes my report.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So I'll be very quick because I haven't had a chance to do very much this year yet so far. But thank you guys all for coming. It's always really good to see you all here. And as we embark on this work together, it's really important that we share the journey and the successes as well as some of the challenges. So I appreciate that. I've shared before, I mentor. I'm part of the Choices Mentor program in Kentwood. And so last year I had 5 young ladies, and 2 of them ended up graduating. And I learned one of them moved away, and one of them's doing a running start, and it doesn't work with my schedule. So now I have to start all over, which is fine. So I was excited to meet 2 new young ladies last Friday, and then we're adding to that. So I'm really excited about that. I had the wonderful opportunity to take my 5th child to college on the 14th over to Central Washington. So that was really exciting. Almost there, 2 more. And my youngest started high school. And so it's been an interesting navigation process. She has, I'll be at the school. She's like, well, what are you doing here? And assuming I'm sit there for her. And I'm like, I'm not here for you. So you're not in trouble or whatever that looks like. But establishing those boundaries and seeing her and just really seeing all of the students who are really excited this year. I was really excited about some of the clubs that are starting at Kentwood and some of the things that are happening and some of the students and involvement. So it's really been a great start to the year. I look forward to being able to visit other schools this year a little bit more. So I had a really good time with that last year. And so yeah, I'm just looking forward to a fantastic year of working with you guys and working with our kids. Being in the schools every week is one of the things that really, really feeds my spirit and feeds my soul. So I'm really excited about that. And so, yeah, thank you. That's about it.
Well, I attended the Kent School Foundation inaugural gala, and it was beautifully done. Paul Vogel and the whole committee that put it together was just a really classy thing. And all the donations that were there that were put in the silent auction, obviously, $50,000, that's great, but the food was good, the company was good, and it was a lot of fun, and it really felt good to be able to put some of my funds toward that and to be a part of it. Also, last week, attended the City of Kent Council meeting where they had a proclamation for September Attendance Awareness Month, and that was really nice that they did that and they shared that with us. And so we took their proclamation I've got. It's out in my car. I was going to bring it in and I forgot, so I'm sorry about that. And then the last thing is just an update on mentoring. I always talk about mentoring, and it's so important. I've started my 4th year with one of my students. She's now a 6th grader, and I can see the progress in her, which is great. I'm starting the 4th year with my college student now, and I'm letting her take her wings a little bit more. I'm not meeting with her as much, and she's really taking a lot of responsibility on herself, which is just super. It's wonderful to see that. And then I've got my other one that I'm probably working with the most, still struggling, but I hope we're going to get there. So I'm there to support her. That's it.
Well, actually, I usually talk about the roles that the board has, and actually over the past 2 weeks, I think there were 3 great examples of there's the stuff that we must do as a board, then there's the stuff that we can do and can do better, frankly, and then there's stuff that we really shouldn't do in our role as a board. And I want to give kind of those 3 examples. The first one was our lovely time spent together last night, over 2 hours, doing the role that only we can do, which is working on superintendent. Not just the goals, but then the metrics of how we measure them, even getting to how we communicate among ourselves and how we want to go forward. So something only we can do and only we should do as a board. So I thank everybody for showing up and working through that. And then, and I'll switch to kind of a short story about kind of the role that we make sure that we don't do. So brief story about a friend whose daughter was having transportation issues with the district, needing a wheelchair accessible bus, wasn't available for several weeks, if not months. And so my role, not as a board member to show up at the desk of the director of transportation and push something through, but rather my role as a friend, as a community member. So taking that kid to school this morning and helping arranging for transportation. And that's, when I think about that's what we can do as a community, as things happen that we don't like with the district for good or bad, we can work together and kind of overcome them and get a kid to school, get a kid to do homework, whatever it is. So I wanted to share that. But also, when I think about the work that we can do better at, some of it already happened. We saw our first of many monthly e-newsletters that came out from the board, so more in terms of the board sending communication out, and then hopefully you've started marking your calendars for our community conversations in October, which are set, I believe it's the 11th and then the 13th, various places, so you can come out and talk to us again. Same kind of format, looking forward to having more people there and talking about whatever's on your mind. So that concludes my report.
So first, I'd like to say I've been to the legislative thing, and I absolutely agree. If you haven't had a chance to go, it's well worth. I've gone a couple of times, and the energy that's there and the collaboration. I know in past years, our district's been able to put proposals forward. Hopefully, in the future, we'll be able to do that as well. I think there's a lot to be said for that. So I was also with Karen at the City of Kent to accept their proclamation, and I did find it interesting, and at the same time, one of those needs where education, as we educate people in our community, how important it is. We had kind of a question that was directed to the fact of, well, isn't attendance only really important for high school? It doesn't really matter for other grades. And so it was a great opportunity for us to share some of the things as a district that we're doing and how attendance is important at every level and not just at the secondary levels. And then I'm also finding this year, I am enjoying the fact my son is a first-year teacher. And so I'm getting a very detailed, I say very detailed because he's calling me every day after school, to say what it's like as a first-year teacher and seeing some of his struggles and things that he's doing. And it makes me even have a greater appreciation for those who serve in our schools and the things that they do. So I'd just like to give a thank you for all that everyone does.
Okay, I have a number of people to thank, and then let's see. First, what I didn't do last time was I forgot to thank Mr. Buzzard, Dave Buzzard, Fred Long, and staff for getting Covington Elementary up to speed. Got a tour of the building, and it was just remarkable, all the work that went into it to open up that school. So thank you for that. I wanted to thank also our school's foundation. Rosie Rourke actually coordinated a lot of that foundation event, and Paul Bogle. Thank you so much for the support to our students. And let's see, we also have our teachers here who are also members of the school's foundation, and so it's truly a community effort. I want to mention that Kent Food Bank fundraiser is on October 12th at Kent Covenant Church, and that is from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., our yearly fundraiser. And then I want to thank our policy intern who came and worked with us from UW, Sean Cower. Shoker, thank you. And she did a fabulous job getting us all up to speed. And thank you to Dr. Harmon as well on that work, important work. And then finally, I want to thank our IB teachers at KM. I got to spend an entire day of IB courses, and I highly recommend all of you to have that experience, because it is truly a treasure that we have. You know, we want to really value the work that goes on there. It's incredible to watch the kids transform. I want to thank Ms. McClung, Kim McClung, who coordinated the programs, IB programs, Mr. Gabbard, Ms. Sandy, Mr. Anderson, and Mr. Fuller, for letting me spend time in the classrooms. And the next suggestion I'm going to make is we all do a 7th grader for a day. I'm told that that is going to be an eye-opener, and that every board member should do 7th grader for a day. So I'm planning on doing that at probably at Meridian one day. So anyway, that concludes my report, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for everything you do for us. Have a good evening, and we are adjourned.